Welcome everyone, I'm your girl, Flygirlchristina, and today I'm here with Coach Jolly, a former NFL O-line and a head coach from Sickles High School. Coach Jolly, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
That is great. So Coach Jolly, let's go ahead and jump right on in. You want to tell the podcast a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I grew up in Virginia, went to a tiny little private school, actually graduated with 36 people. And then I ended up going down to the University of North Carolina, played offensive line there for 5 years, and then ended up going and playing in the NFL for 3. After the NFL, I jumped right into college coaching, bumped around from the East Coast to the West Coast, spent about 9 years in college. Married my wife last spring, and then my wife graduated med school, and that's kind of what brought us down to Tampa because she mastered residency down here at TGH. So that's what I'm doing down here now. In the fall, I was at King High School just as the offensive coordinator, and then in January I got this head job over here at Sickles High School.
Which is great. So why did you decide to become a coach? Because I know you said you went from college football to being an NFL player and then turning around and then coaching in the East and West Coast. So what was that like for you, and why did you become?
So for me, I grew up just loving the game, and I never really truly thought about being a coach until one of my coaches actually in the NFL just kind of got everybody stopped the meeting and said, "Hey guys, when Jolly's done playing football, he's gonna be a heck of a coach," and that kind of what spurred my interest into it. And I've also had just great coaches that have kind of been a second father figure to me. So I just kind of want to return the favor and kind of be that for those guys, for my players as well.
Which is good because I know it sounds like you had good leadership skills when you were in the NFL. Because I know when you're on the O-line, you have to learn how to get your team together and tell everyone, like, hey, we got this. You got to be a leader for your team. So that's great to hear. So when you're coaching, what are your coaching styles looking like when you're coaching a team like Sickles, even though this is your first year?
Right. So I think anytime you go to a new school, you got to kind of be harder on the kids early on because it's easier to back down than it is ramp things up. So you have to have those high demands, those high standards early on, because if you don't, then and you have less and you try to increase the measure going, kids aren't going to respond to that because they're already get used to those lower standards, those lower expectations that you already have. So like I was saying earlier, again, it's kind of a cliche thing, but little things matter. So that's kind of what our program is built on. It's always about what I use for my guys is we call it raise the standard. And what raise the standard means to me is the standard is the best you've ever done at anything. And so whether it's your podcast, so each podcast you're trying to raise the standard every time you do it.
Right.
And so that's what I want my guys to do. I want them to raise their standard in the classroom. And on every test they take, I want them to do better each test. On the field, I want them to do better every play. So if they've ran inside zone 5 times and they've gotten better each time, that means they are raising the standard. But every time they run it, I want them to run it and run it better.
Right. So I know if you tell them you got to always make sure you set the bar high and making sure those standards are always good. And I know you're talking about teams, athletes, and academics. So what do you value in your team this year?
So for me, I'll kind of get into coaching philosophy aspect of it, where I think you have to develop an athlete or a student athlete. You have to develop as a person first, a student second, and an athlete third. And so for what I value in teams is they got to be great people first. So I have to develop them in that. I have to hold them to a high standard off the field, not just on the field. And I have to try to get them to I want them to be that reliable neighbor so that when they are 30, 35, 40, they're living in a neighborhood, someone sits there and walks up and say, hey, my car's broken, who can help me? And they automatically know it's John down the street. That it's second nature for those people in the neighborhood to think that. That's what I want to try to get to these guys. So what I value in a team actually is just great people, because if you get great people, they're going to have a common mission and to be able to go far.
Which is good, because I know sometimes they say it takes one little step to make everything go further. So how do you measure success in coaching?
So obviously some people just measure it in wins and losses.
Right.
But truly I don't think you can truly measure coaching until 10 years down the road. Again, because it kind of goes back to how's that kid going to develop into a man, and what type of man is he going to be 5, 10 years down the line. So that's truly what the measure of success is, in my opinion. But obviously, in the short term, it's okay. Hey, can I instill these values of grit, toughness, those type things? Is this guy gonna? If it gets hard, is he gonna just stop, or is he gonna sit there and say, okay, yes, I'm gonna keep going. I can go farther, and he's gonna push his boundaries. He's gonna get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Right. So I know you have some players now, they want to reach their expectations, and sometimes not everyone's expectations go into reality. But I know with you, it seems like you want all these boys players' expectations to make somewhat of reality and make them to get to where they want to be. So how do you handle a difficult situation when there's something going wrong on the field?
So for me, if it's where a player's messing up and things like that, I'm gonna try to bring him in. I'm gonna try to talk to him and explain to him what he's doing wrong and how he can correct it. Because there's too many coaches out there that just sit there and yell at their coach, yell at their kid, and sit there and tell him what he's doing wrong, but they're not giving him the tools to fix it.
Right.
So that's one thing I want all of my coaches to bring that guy and say, okay, hey, yes, here's your issue, here's the tools and steps to correct it, and I'll go do it.
Right.
But again, so the manner and how you convey that message to me is different, kid to kid or man to man, just because each player responds differently to different types of coaching styles. So that's where you have to be in tune with each player. That's where you have to get to know them, not just on the field but off the field, so you know how they're going to respond to you. Because there's kids that you have to coach a little harder, and you got to be on them a little bit more, and then they're going to respond even better. And there's certain players where you say one thing, they're instantly going to flip what they're doing and try to do exactly what I'm telling them.
Right.
So it's just it's really trying to know what each player needs at a certain time. That's really how you respond to a hard thing. It's just you have to know the kid that you're coaching at that time.
Right. So I know you always gotta, like you said, you can't always know them on the field. You gotta know them outside the field, and that's when you have sometimes you'll have bonding with your player. That's when you want to get to know them. Sometimes you want to know how they act off the field, even in the classroom, because I know now you have student athletes, and a lot of these student athletes now are coming in different GPAs, like 4s and 3s and 2s. But I know you have to worry about how they act on the field, off the field, and then sometimes you always want to make sure you get that bond. Once you get that bond with that player, then you'll be just fine, because you know, like, hey, this player knows this expectation, and this expectation. So, which is good. So I know last season there was a record of 5-6, and I know now, since you're the first year head coach of Sickles High School, how will you improve, and what will you bring to the table this year? Like, how will you improve on what you're gonna do?
So for me, again, it comes back to always having the high demands, high standards that I'm going to set for these guys. It's making sure that these guys get better every day.
Right.
It's holding them to a high standard, having that level of discipline, so that these kids, if I wasn't in there, they go out, they know how to operate without me even being there. It's developing that culture of competitiveness,
Right.
so that these guys understand I need to go try to win every rep, because that's part of them. So the first half of last year they were doing well,
Right.
and then they kind of started to trickle off at the end of the season. It's trying to develop that depth and allowing these younger guys to play, and increasing our strength and conditioning program so that these younger guys develop faster, and that they're able to learn by some of the drills that we're doing, so that they're getting those reps in 7-on-7. It's not just repping the top tier guys on the 7-on-7. It's repping the younger guys, so that if something does happen, then that younger guy is going to have the experience. He's going to have some positive. He's going to have that knowledge, so he's able to go in there and execute, rather than just having a guy. Okay, he's out there at practice, but he's never done 7-on-7. He's never been in a competitive situation. So how is he going to react? Whereas now I know how some of these young guys are going to how they're going to react.
Right.
Also, what we're doing is in the spring I cross train some of my guys that were only playing defense last year, guys trained on some offense and learned that way, and vice versa. And what that also, so I'm not going from a senior playing and then he gets hurt going down to a sophomore or freshman. So it's going to be, okay, just because I don't have great numbers, so I had to do it that way. So it's not, if a senior gets hurt, then I go maybe down to a junior now.
Right.
But maybe it's a two-way starter junior rather than just a one-way starting sophomore now. So that's kind of a big piece to it.
It sounds like a backup plan to me, because I know sometimes when you have one person that's used to working with, like, they always probably say, like, hey coach, I'm only like used to working with defense. we're gonna tell them like you need to get outside the box and work with offense too, because I mean you don't know what's gonna go wrong, and you don't know what player's gonna get hurt, and you don't know what the misconception is. So you got to make sure that you have a backup plan. And to me, it sounds like you have a backup plan. Backup plan, in my opinion.
You have the regular plan. You got a backup plan. You got a backup plan to the backup plan. You got to keep going. So you got to be ready for all situations and all things that could pop up.
Right. So I know sometimes you got to be worried about your situations. But what are your core values as a coach for this year?
So for me, two things I value greatly, because I think both of them are actually really contagious.
Right.
It's energy and positivity.
Yes.
And so for me, just being an offensive line guy, by growing into it, but then playing it and then also coaching it, if I have energy as an offensive lineman, the entire team has energy. And if I have energy as the offensive line coach, then my offensive linemen are going to have energy. Right. Because I want guys to be uppers, I don't want them to be downers. And what I mean by that is I want a kid to walk into a room, I want him to bring the energy level of the room up. I don't want him to bring it down. Another way to talk about it is there's a book out about it, but it's the energy bus. So it's energy bus or energy vampire. So I want all my guys to be energy buses. And so that's a big piece to it. Again, like I said, it's contagious. And then the second one is positivity. Because if you get used to dwelling in the negative, it's going to snowball and you're always going to think negative.
Right.
And so I want how we speak and how we coach our kids, I want us to speak in positives. I want our kids to change how they think. It's not I have to do this extra period of practice. I get to do this extra period of practice. Because when they can start thinking that way, then they're like, okay, now I get to get better because I'm doing more work.
Right.
Rather than, oh, coach is punishing us for this, this, and this. No, you guys are going to get better because you're doing this, but you got to it's rewiring how they think.
Which is good, because I know sometimes you always got to tell them, I like energy, and I like positive energy too. So I know sometimes when one person gets down, the whole team will get down. And sometimes you don't want the whole team to get down off of one person. You got to tell them, if that one person's down, you cheer them up to make them feel a lot better. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think there'll be no great team out there. So are there any players this year that the people need to look out for?
Yeah, so coming back on the second kind of 2.5-year starter, Brandon Royal. He's our quarterback. He's our field general. He's gained a lot of confidence over this offseason, gained a great control over this offense. He's a huge piece to us. Isaiah Hudson, he's kind of an athlete. He can kind of do a little bit of everything for us. He was a starter on defense last year for him. Halfway through, came over on offense. So he's going to be a starter on offense, and he's going to play some defense. But he's an electric player there. Rufus Ferguson, he's our middle linebacker. He started last year. This will be his third year ever playing football. So again, he's still learning the game, but he looks the part. He's 6 foot, 210 pounds. He's a judo guy, so he understands leverage. And then we got AJ Henderson. He's a safety for us, coming over from Cambridge Christian. He's a headsy football player, probably one of the smartest football players in the high school level that I've ever been around. And then we have some younger guys that we need to kind of have them step up and see what they can do. Again, so when we had the spring game, 15 out of my 22 starters have never started a game before.
Oh, wow.
So we're that young. And maybe you might not be that young in age, because some of those guys that were starting were seniors now, but there's just young and experience.
Right. And sometimes you always need young and experience so you can teach them like the mistakes that they made, and then you can also make them better. And I know like you said, some of them are still learning the game because it might be their third, first, or second year playing. And I know some of them got to learn how to get back out on the field. But I'm going to bring another question that's about you. So what was that transition like when you were a football player to now being a football coach for Sickles?
So going from a football player to a football coach, the first season was the hardest because I still had the ability, the physical ability to do it. And so I was out there coaching as a graduate assistant at Old Dominion up in Norfolk, Virginia, and I was working with the offensive line, and I'd demo drills, and I'd do it better than some of the players at times. And then watching the games, you're like, well, just do it. But you got to coach them the right way, because if you just sit there and say, hey, just do this, that's not giving them the keys and the tools on how to do it.
Right. And
so that was the hardest part. It's that frustration level when you're in your early years as a coach, because you learn to move past it and not think about me as an athlete anymore doing it. And now you work more towards a true mental game aspect of it and sitting there and saying, okay, hey, how can I get these guys to understand the things that I did on the field? What cues can I say to them that's going to trigger them? And it's coming up with multiple ways to say the same thing.
Right.
Because you never know what's going to spark somebody's thought process.
Correct. So I know sometimes it's probably tough, like you said, your first season, because you got to learn the right coaching drills and what to teach them. So I know now, since it's your first year coaching a team, a high school team like Sickles, how do you stay updated with your new tactical and training methods? Like, because I know some coaches, they go to different clinics and camps, but how do you keep up with these different tactical coaching?
So for me, it's always just staying plugged in.
Right.
So it is going to conferences, it is going to the seminars and listening to those other coaches, but it's also when I have college coaches come down here to recruit my players, I'll talk to them, I'll ask them, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? Again, I coached in college ranks for 9 years, so I got a bunch of friends that are still college coaches, and I'll reach out to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what's your best play that you've been doing, that you kind of installed this spring or this summer, whatever it is. So I'm trying to get some of those things incorporated from those guys, and it's always just staying plugged in and talking to your contacts or talking to people you even know, and it's just always being open and sharing information.
Which is good, because it seems like you're not afraid to ask any questions when you want to know something, and that's a good thing, because I know some coaches, they might be afraid because they feel like if I ask, I feel like I feel like a newbie. But I mean, it's not, you can't be afraid to ask, because I know once you ask, some people are feeding you with information that you probably didn't know and what you probably did not know. So, which is good to hear. And I think that when you're coaching a team like this, I think it takes a lot of patience, because you have to go through a lot of drills, lots and lots of drills. And I know that it's good having someone like you that was in the league, because if they didn't, they can learn and they can probably look up to you, which is good. So, Coach Jolly, I really do appreciate you for taking the time for talking to me with this podcast, and I think that is a wrap.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
No problem.